right, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. We don't have our usual posse this morning, but I'm glad that Spencer, Michael, and Frankie are here. Thank you for coming in person. Okay. I'm going to share screen with you. As we get started, we're going to take a quick look, as usual, at our schedule, our course schedule for the next few weeks. I know that we did this last time, but in case there are any new people, or for those of you watching later, this is going to be our official course schedule for the next few weeks. We're talking about opera today, the earliest operas, which is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about. Tuesday, November 22nd, we're going to continue to talk about I think we'll probably get to Venetian opera today, and hopefully be able to move straight into other dramatic forms that are not operas per se. And then you'll have a listening quiz, which you can take home over Thanksgiving, or open over Thanksgiving and take on your own time. When you return on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about instrumental genres of the Baroque period. Next Thursday, your media presentations are due. Going to be talking about Bach a little bit if we can, and Handel. And then on the 8th, we will devote the entire period to reviewing for the final exam. That's the plan. As much as we can stick with it, we will. Okay, moving on. Got a couple more people to let in, do I? Nope. All right. Okay, guys, make sure your chat is up in case you have any questions, and let's get started. Got quite a bit of listening to do today. Here we go. Baroque opera. Baroque opera is our topic today. Oh, I hear some people coming in. All right. Yeah, we've got our core group in the classroom ready to go. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All right, starting off our discussion this morning, we'll be on page 295 in our textbook. I want you to turn there if you've got your book or your ebook handy, and want to discuss with you for a second this idea of how to reconstruct an old piece of music. Some questions came up about that right about the time when the musical public began to be interested again in performing old music. And here are the questions that came up. You know, 50 years ago, we, as performers and musicians, we used to just play everything the same way, whether it was an opera from 1607 or an opera from 1867. That's all that we thought, that all we knew how to do. But then musicology came along as a scholarship, and we started finding people, we started hearing from people who said, wait a minute, this music is not supposed to be played the same way that we play a romantic symphony. It needs to be performed differently. We need to be faithful to the way that the music would have been performed. And so this is a wave of thought that really caught on around the world and fascinated musicians. And here are the questions, the central questions that came up out of what was called the historically informed performance practice. Sometimes it's referred to as HIPP, historically informed performance practice. And suddenly everybody was trying to figure out how to play early music the way that it would have been performed. How do we, as performers, know how a piece of music would have been performed? What do we have to go on? What do we have to tell us? Obviously, there's no recordings. We've talked about this before in class. There weren't any recordings to listen to. There was barely any music. Certainly, music was kind of skeletal in the way that it was presented on paper or parchment, because it was understood that the performers and instrumentalists and singers were supposed to improvise a lot of the score. So how on earth do we know how it would have been performed? Somebody tell me in the chat. What do we have to go on? If you've got your textbook open to page 295. Spelled out for you. You skim through there. Anyone have an idea? The only thing that we have to go on are those little scraps of things that remain, of scores that remain, and historical treatises and instruction books or guidebooks. And then we also have people's journals, diaries, who describe, these are primary sources, called primary sources, people who were actually at these performances and described how they looked. And the last thing we have is public press, like newspaper articles. Sometimes programs stick around so we can see how long a performance took and who the performers were, etc. That's pretty much it. That is all we have to go on. And we know through pictures and treatise books and instruction manuals what the performance instruments would have looked like. And we can now construct what those instruments would have been like and see the kind of timbres that they produced. Okay, next question. Should we try to recreate it the way it was? Is that an obligation that we have? Is it just a curiosity? Should we try to reconstruct old music the way it would have been played? Is it even possible to perform old music exactly the way it would have been performed? Or are there always limits to what we can know? Any responses? Anybody want to offer an opinion about that? This is these are questions that became a very big deal about 20 years, 30 years ago. And people began to ask them, and people began to argue about them. And it became a very controversial issue. So please keep these questions in mind. There other questions will come up as well, like if I'm a stage director and I'm putting on a performance of a Monteverdi opera, should it be a stage version that is in period costume that would have been how the work was? Colin, keep an eye on that. Sorry, guys. Okay. Sorry, guys. Should we reconstruct it the way it would have looked on stage, or are we free to take it out of its own time as an opera director and put it into a new time period? That is a thing these days. That's a trend. They're called modern. Sometimes they're referred to derogatorily as Eurotrash or schmopera. And what that refers to is, well, some people think very negatively about taking a performance tradition and turning it on its ear, producing the same music and with the same instruments, but having the stage portray a modern setting. We'll look at a couple of those. I'm anxious to see what you think. Some people love them. Some people don't like them. Some people think they're liberating. Other people think that they're abominable, because how dare you mess with something so sacred as a piece of old music? Okay, keep these questions in mind, because we're going to be looking at some music that does attempt, at some performances that do attempt to reconstruct the way that it would have sounded in the 1600s. Okay, Baroque opera, terms to know. I'm adding to this as we continue along on our exploration, 17th century, and we get further into our topic. I'm going to be putting extra words on this slide with the hopes that at the end you can use it as a study sheet. We haven't talked yet about the word monody. Monody is sort of the same as monophony, except monody refers to the trend in the 17th century. Colin, no more. Sorry, guys. It refers to the trend in 17th century vocal music to have just a single vocal line, one single vocal line with harmony underneath it. Continuo instruments playing harmony underneath. Sometimes it might be two people on stage singing, and that would be called a duet, obviously, like it is today, or three people, a trio, four people, a quartet, or a group of people, a chorus. But arias were typically sung by one person, and that was considered to be monody. And that was it's not that that hadn't been done before, but it was being done in new ways with new harmonies and new arrangements. We know what castrati are. We've talked about ornamentation, improvisation, embellishment. One word that you may not have heard before is diminutions. We're going to talk about that a little more in depth today. And that's simply a way that mostly instrumental music chose to ornament a melodic line. With vocal music, it was generally considered, it was called embellishment or ornamentation during the Baroque period. Okay. What distinguishes opera from other forms of vocal music? This, by the way, is a sketch that was in an early program or perhaps a newspaper article of the composer who is generally considered one of the two earliest composers of something that we now call opera, in the form that it is, or similar to the form that it is presented today. Jacopo Peri. This little illustration is from 1600, and this is actually the composer. This is somebody's sketch of the composer, Peri, wearing a costume that Orpheus would have worn. There's his lyre, there's his cute little pink skirt and jacket, and his wreath of laurels, true to the Greek style, Greek drama. Okay, characteristics of early opera. Union of poetry, drama, music, art, stagecraft, opera, and ballet. I would say, I'm going to add the word dance to this list because it brought everything together. It brought elaborate stage machinery in. And keep in mind, there was no electricity, of course, not even any lights during this time. So the things that directors and technicians came up with to depict things like oceans, for example, on a tiny stage were quite remarkable for the time. An opera can be described by continuous music. Even the dialogue is sung. It was performed with scenery, costumes, and action, as opposed to just being performed with a static singer. Okay, those are the three major points of differentiation between opera and other forms of vocal music. Here is his Jacopo Peri. You need to know who this name is associated, what this name is associated with as a musician, because he will come up over and over again to those of you who end up performing with symphonies, especially even if you don't accompany operas in a pit, in an orchestra pit, you will probably come across music of this era. There is only one existing score fragment of a very early opera. And as you will see quickly, there are more than one of operas during this time period that were based on a Greek myth, Orpheus and Eurydice. Jacopo Peri, and remember, the whole opera does not exist. It's only a fragment. It's only a fragment with a couple of pieces of music. But it was enough for us to understand and realize, as scholars and musicians, that this kind of situation that we're seeing here is brand new. What's new about it is that it's not a melody per se. It's speech. It's a new idiom. It's half speech, half song. And if an opera is through composed, that means it is sung from the top to the bottom or from the beginning to the end. It would be very, very boring if people just sang arias the entire 2 hours. We're going to need to break that up with some drama, with some action, with some conversations happening here and there. And this is the way that Jacopo Peri tried to achieve that. I'm going to read you a little bit of a description from your textbook on page 303. This is an example of the first recitative. It's called recitativo or stile recitativo, the recitative style sometimes. And this example shows how Peri followed his own prescription for the new style. The vertical boxes that you're seeing identify the syllables that are sustained or accented in speech. Let me repeat that. It indicates the syllables that would have been accented if you were speaking the Italian. Okay, like, for instance, if you were speaking this text, ma la bella Eurydice movia danzando il pie sul verde prato, quando hai risorta acerba, angue curo espietato. Those are the natural accents of the language. So on those accents of the language, on those naturally accented speech patterns, there would be a chord in the continuo. What are the continuo or instruments again? There would have been either the harpsichord, the lute, the theorbo, which we talked about on Tuesday, maybe a little portable organ. And the job of the continuo was to match these accented syllables. And here's what it sounded like. 73B. Let me get your playlist up instead of the ebook here. But yes, this is the one. And I'm going to start it right where, see if I can get a double screen option going for you here. Nope. I'm going to start this. Hopefully you can see. Well, you know, forget that. I'm going to minimize my slides so that you can, if you want to follow along as the music's happening, it's very short. Go to page 303. This chart, this example 14.1 is on that page. But again, just memorize the way this looks. Strong syllables are accented or underscored with a chord. And sometimes the speech moves very quickly, and sometimes it moves very slowly. This particular example is called a form we call narrative recitative or narrativo recitativo. Narrative, it tells a story. Eurydice, main characters, just to remind you, are Eurydice, obviously, and Orfeo. The married couple, recently married couple. Eurydice is bitten by a snake at her wedding reception, and she dies. She goes to the underworld, and Orfeo begs the gods to go back into Hades, or go into Hades, descend into Hades, and bring his wife out. And that's the simple version of the story. Okay, here we go. Let's just repeat this very first section again so you can hear those stresses. Okay, you might think of this as a narration. Well, it's called narrative recitative. She's not saying anything. The character is not saying anything. She's telling a story. Here's the bit of narration that you just heard, the English translation. But the lovely Eurydice dancingly moved her feet on the green grass. Oh, oh, bitter, angry fate, a snake, cruel and merciless, that lay hidden in the grass, bit her on the foot. That's what you just heard. So that is what we call narrative recitative or recitativo, as opposed to the other style you need to be familiar with, expressive recitative, which is when the character is singing, like Orfeo is in this example, but he's expressing his feelings a little bit. He's actually kind of acting out his emotions, not as completely as he would be if he were singing an aria per se, but it's a little more it's a little more dotted with text painting, not so straightforward. I don't think there's an example of this, or I would play it for you, but this is what it looks like. It's filled in a little bit with some chromatics, and you can see that the ground bass is kind of filled in a little bit. It's a little fuller and is a little more melodic. If the person that is speaking is speaking from his own emotion, which is happening here. I do not weep and I do not sigh, says Orfeo, oh my dear Eurydice, for I cannot weep. I cannot, I am too stricken. All right. This is, I'm going to play this for you as an example of an early aria as opposed to an early recitative. This is also from Peri's Eurydice. Nel pur ardor. There it is. This is yeah. Let me look up this translation for you. 73A, because I think that's always important, is for you to know what the characters are saying. And if you don't have your book with you, it's even more important. This is the entrance of a character that announces the bad news that Eurydice has been bitten by the snake. He comes into I'm sorry, I'm completely wrong. Let me go back and repeat that and correct myself. This is a wedding celebration, a recitative. I'm sorry, aria. This is an aria that a character sings it during Eurydice and Orfeo's wedding. And it's basically talking about the golden torch, the beautiful fire. Oh, happy God, with celestial fire, the soul's in flame. He's speaking to the god of marriage, basically. Let your shower of lofty sweetness overflow into the breasts of the fortunate lovers, and amidst pretty songs of delightful loves, stir in their hearts a gentle breeze, a smile of paradise. So it's a wedding song. Also very short. Here we go. Recorders and harpsichord. It's interesting combination of instruments to be interspersed with the vocal line. That, by the way, is called a ritornello. That's a term that you need to know. This is because it was continued all through the Baroque period and sometimes even the classical period before it was replaced with another concept. A ritornello is an instrumental refrain that continues to reoccur between the vocal lines or between stanzas of an aria. Other terms that developed: sinfonia was a little musical piece, a short, I should say, musical piece that served as a prelude and could be taken out of the score and performed on a concert, in a concert style. It didn't have to be performed, I mean, in just in the aria, in the context of the opera. It could be, it stood alone and it could be removed. All right. Lots of people wrote stories, operas based on this theme of Orfeo and Eurydice, based on this Greek myth. We're going to see a little bit of Monteverdi's. Why is Monteverdi's more important or considered more important than Jacopo Peri's Orfeo? Well, first of all, we have the whole thing. And secondly, it caught on. It became very, very popular. And it's still performed all over the world, all the time. So it's become one of those pieces of the canon that was prized and repeated and reproduced very often. as soon as people understood that musicians understood that they could actually repeat or reproduce an early opera. So take a second, please. I'm going to give you a second here to read a little bit about the synopsis. This is a very short version, but skim through it. Take a second. Can you all in the classroom see that okay? Let me see if I can enlarge it a little bit. Oops. As it was typical, the opera was broken up into 5 acts. As is also typical, a couple of the characters are not necessarily people with names, but personifications of qualities, like Speranza. Speranza in Italian means hope in English. This is not a girl named Hope. This is a personification of the quality, the feeling of hope. It's another character named Echo. Couple more minutes. I'll let you read through this. Okay. All right, you do have access to that. Remember, you can read through that later if you like, but I want to go ahead and move on. Their link is right there in the slideshow, which, as far as I know, is live and functional on all these links are functional on BB Learn. And if they're not, I hope somebody will tell me, because I'm going on that assumption. All right, let's look at a little bit of this. The first thing I want to show you is a bit of what's called the or I can't remember the version of what they call it, the trattoria or trattoria. Yeah, this is the introduction. This is an early production that we're going to take a look at right here, an early version of the Orfeo production. But it's interesting because it's very traditional, and that's for that reason alone we should watch a couple of scenes of this. But it's also interesting because it's one of the very first staged versions of Monteverdi's Orfeo and early opera, where they're actually trying to reproduce the staging and the costumes and the look and the sound of what an early opera would have sounded like. This is conducted by Jordi Savall, and I want to play you the introduction because first of all, it's very energetic. Secondly, it's beautiful, and it's very typical of Monteverdi's style. And the third reason is because I want you to see Jordi Savall conducting. Jordi Savall was one of the first people to really embrace this early music style. And this is his entrance and the very first thing that the orchestra plays, the prelude of Monteverdi's Orfeo. Okay. So hopefully you got a good look at the all the instruments that we've been talking about, and especially that giant theorbo down there on stage right, well, stage pit right, giant lute. It's very interesting. All right, let us listen now to, let's see if I can get to the very quickly to the entrance of the nymph Sylvia, who comes in and tells the wedding party that Eurydice has been bitten by a snake. Yes, I think this is it.
Al suono lente il lieto ti perturba. Mentre Orfeo con sue note il ciel consola, con le parole mie questa è Silvia gentile, dolcissima compagna della bella Euridice. Oh, quanto in vista dolorosa, or che fia te sommitei, non torcete da noi benigno il guardo. Star, lasciate il canto, ogni nostra allegrezza in Onde vieni, dove vai, ninfa, che porti? A te ne vengo Orfeo
pause it for a second just to point out that that was an example of which kind of recitative, narrative or expressive? Narrative or expressive? It's expressive. This is not a narrator telling what happens. These are two people who are trying to act out what happens, and they're expressing their feelings about what happened. It's not an aria or a duet, but it's a type of recitative between two characters. What we're going to hear next is Orfeo's reaction, his grief, his feelings about having just lost his wife. So this, what we're going to listen to next, is an aria.
In un fiorito prato, con altre sue compagne, giva cogliendo fiori, per farne una ghirlanda alle sue chiome, cantando insidioso che era fra l'erbe ascoso, e porse un piede con velenoso dente, ed ecco immantinente scolorersi il bel viso, e nei suoi lumi sparir quei lampi, ond'ella il sol via scorno. Allor, voi tutte sbigottite meste, le fu incontro, richiamar tentando gli spiriti, lei smarriti, con l'onda fresca e con possenti carni. La prese ella il languidi lumi alquanto prendo, e te chiamando Orfeo, Orfeo. Dopo un grave sospiro, spirò fra queste braccia, ed io rimasi pieno il cuore di pietade e di spavento.
Skip through to the beginning of Orfeo's aria, his response aria.
Se morta mia vita, ed io respiro, tu sei da me partita, sei da me partita per mai più non tornare, ed io rimanga. No, no, che se i versi alcuna cosa ponno, non andrò sicura più profondi abissi. Intenerito il cor del re dell'ombre, meco trarotti a rivedere le stelle, ma se ciò negherà mio destino, rimarrò teco in compagnia di morte. Addio terra, addio cielo e sole,
Okay. Pretty somber subject. Not much cheerful about this opera. It pretty much goes from sad scene to sad scene, but visually very beautiful. Okay, moving on. Opera became public. Opera became something completely different when it made its way to Venice. And in Venice, Venice was considered at the time a very forward, politically liberal, as much as it could be, free from boundaries kind of place where anything went. There was open eroticism, homosexuality. There was there were public performances by women. Oh my God, it's scandalous. There were professional courtesans, and people would have these riotous festivals. The people of Venice, every so often, they were called carnivals, where everybody would mask up. They would wear masks. They would wear costumes for a weekend, kind of like Mardi Gras. And because they were disguised, they could be and do anything that they wanted to do during that weekend. One of the things that they loved to do was go to public performances of opera. And so opera turned into something that was a moneymaker. Admission was charged. And what developed as a result of that, as it will, is that we start seeing individual singers, and male and female, become quite famous. Terms to know for this section of our opera study. This is where we start to see the term diva for the first time, or prima donna, the lead part in an opera. If a male were the primary role in the opera, he would be called a primo uomo, the Italian word for man. We see, instead of courtly, noblemen commissioning these operas, we start seeing businessmen, impresarios, who would raise or put forth the money for production. And they would hire a big public theater to produce or to put on the production. They would hire the best singers that they could afford, the dancers. They would build elaborate sets. The impresario was in charge of all of that. Lots of moving parts in these public operas. It was basically when opera as it is today began to show its eventual, permanent characteristics. And we start to see librettists, the authors of the version, the version of text that would eventually be put to music. Librettists began to be celebrated and also hired. So what we're going to look at next, and probably I don't know if we'll have time to look at anything else or listen to anything else this morning, but Monteverdi's hands down most famous opera, I would venture to say, is The Coronation of Poppea. It's not based on a myth, and this is characteristic of Venetian public opera. It was based on a piece of history, characters who actually existed back in ancient Rome. They were human characters as opposed to mythological characters. They felt things. They felt emotions and had hopes and dreams and motivations and temptations that they struggled with. The stage effects, if you can imagine, in these public opera houses became extremely elaborate. They could affect things like magical transformations of a person or a landscape. They could have people disappearing underneath the stage in trapdoors all of a sudden, or other actors or singers appearing from the top of the proscenium for the top of the stage, descending on a cloud from heaven. They could make the stage look like a rolling sea. They could do all sorts of pyrotechnics. So the set designs and the scenery became a big thing. The other thing that was a big difference in Venetian opera is that you didn't just have one of those human emotions or affections that we talked about last week. It could go back and forth between drama and comedy, between sad, happy, angry. It could go any direction that the librettist and composer wanted it to go. So opera becomes much more dynamic, much more entertaining to watch, with the bits of comedy thrown in, and really worthy of public spectacle. And that's what they were called. They were called spectacles. Now, let's just take this opera, for instance, The Coronation of Poppea. When it started to be reproduced and put on stage, mostly it was performed very traditionally, straight by the book, from what we know of how it would have been performed back in 1607 or 1637, I think, is when this one was first published, or first presented to the public. Now we have very modern productions. LA Opera just put on a modern production of one of Monteverdi's operas. It was very minimalistic. The only set design was a rock with different colors and textures projected behind it in the LA Opera version. This is a production by a kind of progressive performing group of early opera called Les Arts Florissants. The stage director is William Christie. And I don't know if you're familiar with that name. He's a champion of early music. We're going to watch a couple of scenes from this production, but before I show it to you, I want to let you watch a little interview that is, pause. Little interview that was held between the actress singer that plays Poppea. Her name is Sonia Ioncheva, and the director. And she's talking about the story of The Coronation of Poppea. She's talking about the characters Nero and Poppea, the Emperor Nero. And she's talking about what it's like to be a part of this very unusual modern production. think I'm not sharing screen anymore, so let me do that. Here we go. Can somebody please speak up if you cannot hear this? I cannot hear this. I'm hoping you can. All right. By the way, that the character in gold was the Emperor Nero, in case you didn't figure that out by watching that. And it's played by one of my favorite Baroque singers, Kate Lindsay. She doesn't just sing Baroque, but a very interesting cross gender representation kind of issue, which was very, 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 very common. Men would play women, and now when we reproduce these operas, women play the role of of men that would have been sung in 1637 by a castrato. So that's what we're seeing here. It gets very confusing. So this is Nero, who would have been played by a castrato at the time of this production. And today, in the 20th century, 21st century, excuse me, she is played, or he is played by a female mezzo-soprano. Very interesting. Okay, this is the beautiful final duet. I'm going to let you watch this and probably let you go. Por ti miro. It kind of sounds like a pop song. But after that gruesome, edgy production, which you just saw a trailer for, it ends with this very beautiful duet and some very interesting things going on behind also in the stage action.
Did you see my
Still
friend?
trying
We're
to,
talking.
You should be doing something
trying
else.
to trigger.
You take the lead on this. You're less
volume
intimidating.
here.
Don't find me intimidating? No, it's the height thing. Hi. Working in the New York
Yes.
Times. I believe he used to work for
Here we
Harvey
go.
Weinstein.
That entire album is available, by the way, for purchase. All right, time to go. Let me say one thing before I let you go, and that is, did I just lose you? Okay. Not quite sure what I just did. But if you're still with me, guys, let's wrap it up for today. I'm going to put this online for you to watch, and I will see you Tuesday. We will not have class on Thursday. It's Thanksgiving, but I'll be with you Tuesday at the same time, same place. And we'll talk about a little bit, maybe one more opera. That's what we have time for. And then we'll go into some instrumental music of the Baroque period. Bye-bye.